talk with us about drought indices and soil moisture and how to understand the world of drought and plant response in ways that are more useful than just rainfall.
Okay, thank you very much, Anita. And before I get started, I just want to thank the major people who are contributing to this project, Mike Crimmins, Marcel Schaub, and Craig Rasmussen. And then also the partners on this project, Guido from the Nature Conservancy, the Climate Assessment for the Southwest, the CLEMAS, the Soil, Water, and Environmental Science Department, which is my home department at the University of Arizona, and then also a space grant that I have from the Arizona Space Grant Program. And in today's talk, I'm going to be going over 4 major key points. First, just a little bit of context about Arizona's rangelands and why monitoring drought on them is important. Then I'm going to talk a little extensively about standardized drought indices, because they're the main type of index that we're using for our soil moisture modeling project. Specifically how they're calculated and this idea of different time windows that they can be calculated at. And then I'm going to talk about our actual soil moisture modeling project, where we're trying to compare modeled soil moisture with commonly used drought indices to see how well they're correlated. And then if I have time at the end, I'm going to talk about a web application that we're developing, and we'll display these results to the public. Alright, so just to start off, Arizona's rangelands are of course important for livestock grazing, wildlife habitats, outdoor recreation, and in general this open space. And because most of these lands are sustained based on rain-fed agriculture, they're vulnerable to drought related to Arizona's unique seasonal transitional climate. Specifically, the timing, frequency, and magnitude of precipitation during the monsoon and winter rainy season. And changes in that precipitation can play a major role in how these lands are productive over the next coming months. And therefore, monitoring drought is not only critical, but very important for planning and management decision making. When we think about monitoring drought on rangelands, typically the way it's done currently is, I think things are divided into 2 different categories, either based purely on climate or mostly on soils. And the original proposal for this project was trying to link these 2 major things together. So the link between the relationship that we know exists between climate and soils. And ideally, when we monitor drought, at least from my point of view, it would be nice to just use real soil moisture data. It's a good indicator of overall ecosystem health, and it's a good way to measure potential drought stress on vegetation. Unfortunately, the data that's associated with soil moisture is very limited historically and spatially. There's a lot of problems with the probes that are used to measure soil moisture. It can be very labor intensive to keep up with soil moisture, and therefore using real soil moisture data is a bit of a challenge. Another way we can monitor drought is by monitoring vegetation, using different remote sensing tools, or a lot of hydrological variables. But the main thing that we're going to be using for this project is these different drought indices. And the World Meteorological Organization defines drought indices as statistical methods of monitoring indicators of drought severity. And indicators of drought severity are things like monthly precipitation totals, monthly min and max temperature, transpiration rates, etc. So one specific type of drought index is a standardized drought index, and a standardized drought index takes a time series of data and it ranks it from its highest number to its lowest, and then it maps it to a standard distribution around the mean of the data. And what that looks like in practice is if I have some time series of precipitation. This is yearly total precipitation from 1990 through 2014. It ranks that data from its highest to lowest, and then finds the mean of that data and maps it to a standard distribution or a bell curve, where the tick marks going out from the center, or the mean, are standard deviations. And that tells us something about how spread out this data is. If we have a year that's wetter than average, it'll plot as a positive standard deviation, or a blue, or a wet year. And if we have a year that's below the mean yearly total precipitation, it'll plot as a dry year, or a negative standard deviation. And the further we get away from the mean, the further we get out onto these tails, out on the tails will be an indication of the frequency of that event. So if we have an event that is far out on the tail, then we know that's something that doesn't happen very often. If we have something that's closer to the mean, that's closer towards the center of the graph, and there's more data being plotted, then we know that's a more frequent event. And the way these are shown on a drought index are by these things called z-scores, which are essentially just shorthand notations for standard deviations. So whenever you see a drought index and it's saying a value of 2.5, it's indicating something about the frequency of that event, and it's telling you that that is an uncommon event. If you have a z-score that's negative 0.5, it would be telling you something that it's a slightly drier than average for this specific example. When we look at an actual drought index, this is a standardized precipitation index, or SPI. What you're really looking at is a time series of those z-scores through time. So this specific graph is going from 1979 through 2018, and it's just taking all the data that's available for precipitation data and then ranking it and assigning it a z-score value. Whenever data plots on the positive, it'll be a blue value, which indicates above average precipitation or surplus, and then if it's below, it'll be a red value, which indicates below average precipitation. And the last thing to talk about before we move into our project is this idea of indexed time windows, where time windows aggregate data over multiple months and rank it with other occurrences of that time window on record. So for example, if we were looking at the standardized precipitation index, or SPI, at a 2-month window, we would be aggregating precipitation data over, let's say we're using this example for May and April, we would be aggregating data over April and May and then comparing it to all other instances of April, May's on record, and ranking them and see where did that 2-month window perform. If we wanted to look at the monsoon season, we could use a 4-month window during the month of September, which would capture data back to June, so you would capture the entire monsoon season, and then it would rank it to all other 4-month September windows on record. And what we were looking at before was a 12-month window. And how this works in practice is essentially it's a rolling window. So if we're using the example of a 6-month time window, it would look, starting in June, it would capture data back to January, take the aggregate of that data compared to all other January through June's on record, and then rank it. And then as you move through time, it just takes that data and then plots it to the time series. So that was an example of a 6-month window. Here's an example of a 1-month SPI window, a 6-month SPI window, and a 12-month SPI window. And when you look at these different windows, you begin to see different things depending on the size of time scale that you're using. So here at the 1-month scale, during around 1985, there would be some indication that we're heading into some form of severe drought. However, if we're looking at the 12-month SPI, it's indicating that we're in some form of water surplus. So the question becomes, if the 12-month SPI is saying that we're in surplus, and the 1 month is signaling that we're in drought, which one of these windows should we be using? Which one should we be trusting? And this is where we're going to start using some soil moisture modeling to try to decipher between these and get some form of answers. So we're going to use some modeled soil moisture work as an objective measure, against which to evaluate simple, readily available drought indices. Or another way of saying this is how well do standardized drought indices represent modeled soil moisture. So this is our model. We're using a model called Hydrus, which is a soil moisture model that solves the Richards equation for water transport. We're simulating data from 1979 through 2018 to get a time series of soil moisture. We have one major input to the model, which is precipitation, and then 3 major outputs from the model, which are evaporation, transpiration from our roots, and any water that's left in the profile that makes it past our root zone will be taken into the profile by gravity. So the concept of this project is that we have a soil model. We have some inputs that we need, like location, climate data. Right now we're using data from around Empire Ranch. Some soil information and some vegetation data. We then put that data into our model, And then out of that, we get a time series of soil moisture, just like you could have a time series of precipitation or temperature. We then standardize that data in the same process that I described before. So we have a new soil moisture index on one hand, and then on the other hand, we have these simple, readily available drought indices like the SPI or the SPEI or the PDSI. And the question is, how well are these two things related? And additionally, we gave a fancy name. It's not as good as seeds, but modeled soil moisture index, or MSMI. And essentially, how this is working is we're looking at some time window. So, for example, the 3-month SPI from April. We're looking at how it compares with our modeled soil moisture for the month of April, and then moving to the next month, and so on and so forth. And we can do this for any length of time window. There's websites out there that go up to 48 months. For our project, we're specifically looking out to 24 months or 2 years. And when you do that, we get a graph that looks like this. So on the x-axis here is all the different possible index scales that you could look at. So starting from 1 month going out to 24 months. And then on the y-axis is how well our model is correlating with, in this case, 2 specific drought indices, the SPI and the SPEI. And what we see is this is for 10 centimeters specifically, we have a pretty strong peak around 2 months. So this is a time series of our model here in black, and then the 2-month SPI plotted on top of it. Here is a graph where it doesn't line up nicely, so this would be the 12-month SPI overlaid on top of our model for 10 centimeters. We can do this for whatever depth we're interested in because we're modeling the soil moisture. So that was 10 centimeters we looked at originally. Here's 30 centimeters in the center, and then 50 centimeters on the far right. Again, we can find the peaks where they correlate best with our model. So the SPI correlates best at a 2-month window at 10 centimeters, 5 months at 30 centimeters, and 7 months at 50 centimeters. And what we notice here is that as we're moving deeper into the soil, the scale at which is correlating best with the soil moisture is also increasing. So the last thing I want to talk about before my time ends is the principles that are making this project work. Where the first is that soils have memory, where it takes time for precipitation to move down through a soil. So if I have some soil profile with depth on my y-axis and time on my x-axis, and I have some precipitation event that occurs, it's going to take time for the wetting front from that precipitation event to move down through the soil and reach deeper and deeper depths. The other principle here is that these drought indices, specifically standardized drought indices, also have memory, and their memory is associated with these time windows. We're using shorter windows, you're going to be capturing more recent precip events, and using longer time windows, you're going to be capturing more distant past precip events. And we can utilize this relationship between the memory that's inherently built into soils and time windows that are built into these drought indices as a proxy for depths in soils. So another way of saying that is if I have some heavy precipitation event that falls in January, something that would puncture down to a deep depth. If I'm using a 2-month window during the month of February, I'm still going far enough back in time that I can probably still capture that January event. And then as I move down deeper and deeper into the soils, I can use longer windows back in time to still hopefully capture that event as it's moving down through the soil. So we move back to our question of, if the 12-month SPI is signaling surplus, but the 1 month is signaling drought, which one is correct? The answer is that it's both, because the index scales are representing different portions of the soil profile. And that's what this looks like here, where this is 10 centimeters on top and then 30 centimeter modeled soil moisture on the bottom. 10 centimeter correlates best with a 2-month SPI window, and if you wanted to look at soil moisture at 30 centimeters, you would use something like a 6-month. Outline time. Okay. The last thing I want to say, quick elevator pitch. We're developing an app that will display all of this stuff. Hopefully be ready by November, December. The general idea is that you'll log on, you'll put in your soil type and choose a depth of interest. Then you'll associate this graph here that I was showing before, where it'll show all the different index scales that are available and how well different drought indices are correlating with our model. And then we built this drought diagnostic tool down here on the lower part of the graph, where we're plotting our model in black, and then different drought indices, in this case the SPI and SPEI, blue and red. And by shifting these scales, we can see how the relationship tightens up between our model and these different drought indices. And then on top of that, we can overlay different climate variables like precipitation or temperature. These graphs are zoomable, and we can zoom in and try to see why our model is splitting from the drought indices. Did we have a bad winter rainy season, or was it very hot out? And try to begin to learn what's going on. So in summary, there's this relationship that exists between index time windows and the memory that's apparently built into soil moisture. Using shallower depths correlates best with shorter index windows, and then deeper depths works better for longer index windows. And then lastly, we're developing this drought diagnostic tool application. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So I've seen this talk before as a caveat for this question, but at what depth, I don't know if you've modeled this, I'm sure you've iterated all this, but at what depth do you essentially get an annual soil memory? So in the sense that what soil depth in this soil type do you get the best correlation with a 12-month index?
So there's once you get below 50 centimeters, the correlations break apart a little bit more because the first thing is our roots start to trail off, and I don't have a definitive answer for that right now. It's going to be below 50 centimeters. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm asking in the context, and I expect that it would be below that.
Yeah.
I'm asking that in the context of different vegetative communities that we have in these systems, and the depth to which their roots can reach and can't reach, depending on the species. And Julia talked about shallow versus deep groundwater in ephemeral systems, and how you may still have a cottonwood gallery forest, even though the groundwater is 30 feet below the surface. And I'm kind of wondering how, sort of summarizing what everybody's talked about today, if we have successive years of drought, right, how that is then killing those species that can have deeper taproots. But I don't know, it's just kind of interesting.
I don't have a definitive answer, but I will get back to you as we continue our modeling efforts.
All right, excellent. All right, that's a wrap for our afternoon presentations, and I'm going to turn it over now to Tani for the wrap on the whole day.
Okay, and we know that people are trickling away.